Hello. Today we're going to cover Hans Noel's article, 10 Things Political Scientists Know That You Don't. Before we get started, I just want to say that I love this article. Whenever I discuss this article with students, I find that students think it's probably one of the better things we'll read all semester. But a couple of ideas before we dive too deep. One thing to note is that if we recall from chapter 1 of the many political science subfields, this article is primarily concerned with what is called behavioralism. And it's the study of voters and the public and other things that are political behaviors of people. And so as we go through, let's find out what a behavioralist kind of has come to many conclusions about. Hans Noel is uh, basically gathering some of the most thought-provoking ideas that have been created in political science thanks to its research. So let's get started. So, thing number 1 of the 10 things that political scientists know is that the fundamentals are supremely important to who gets elected. And you can look at simple metrics like the strength of the economy. The strength of the economy is a good indicator on how the incumbent party will fare in an election. Now, any incumbent party is the party whose leadership is in a position of power at the time of re-election. Take, for example, this year in 2020, Donald Trump is part of the Republican Party, and they are the incumbent party. And so voters are going to really try to analyze the economy, whether or not it's going in a forwards or backwards direction, and make a political calculation to see who do they want to throw their support to. So the health of the economy is something that is supremely important to elected officials. Think of the president's remarks most recently. He has an interest in reopening the economy, and some of that has to deal with the knowledge with the idea that his success is very much intertwined with the economy. Now, a couple of other ideas and items make up the fundamentals as well. Take, for example, war. If a war is unpopular, and many wars in the modern era have been unpopular, a president and the incumbent party, whether that's in Congress, the presidency, or statewide elections, if we're at war, voters tend to not like that. Also, if a president's party, such as the Republican or Democratic Party, has been in office for a long time, let's say 2 terms, then the public generally tends to prefer giving the other party a shot, meaning more voters, more swing voters, will decide to align with another party. Voters also care about who is more ideologically moderate, and voters may be party activists in the primary election, which happens before when it's among people, members of the same political party vying to be the party's nominee. But then in the general election, it's pretty much a toss-up between who do moderate voters think, because there are people, small group, but when we say small, we're factoring millions of voters who are concerned, who could lean either in the Republican or Democratic direction, just depending on who they align with more. Being moderate is a key to success. And finally, there is small evidence that droughts, floods, shark attacks, you could even add in a global pandemic, could all play a role in whether or not the incumbent party will do fairly well or not as well as you'd hope. So let's dive in a little bit further. Haha, funny, good joke. Number 2, Hans Noel kind of gathers this intelligence, and he shows that the will of the people is hard to determine. Public opinion research has shown that most people are not ideological. They do not have strong political opinions. They don't craft a lot of political opinions. They rather take cues from party leadership. And another idea is that polls can only tell us so much. Polls are great at telling us yes or no questions, such as, do you like the job that the president's doing or the job that his Congress is doing? But polls really struggle with answering questions like why or how much. And so we can think of polls as having even some limited capability in themselves. Thing number three is that the will of the people might not even exist. Take, for example, in the 1912 presidential election, we saw a problem amongst our political institutions. Not a problem, but a challenge. In the 1912 election, we saw a battle between candidate Taft, candidate Theodore Roosevelt, and Democratic candidate Woodrow Wilson. And in this election, two candidates who were pretty popular within the Republican Party were extremely favored among the entire nation. However, since there were two candidates, Theodore Roosevelt running on a third-party ticket, they both split the GOP, the Republican Party vote, leaving Woodrow Wilson to be the victor. And so even though voters may have wanted one of the two between Taft and Roosevelt, they ended up with Wilson because the election rules gave Wilson the clearer path to the presidency. Number four, there's no such thing as a political mandate. Now, what this means in practice, whenever a newly elected official comes into power, they will say things like, the voters have made it clear. They want me to pass this type of legislation. And many politicians do in order to curry and support their existing party, their existing preferences and goals that they've sought out to deliver. However, whether or not a person wins by 90% of the vote to 10% or 51%, it's simply should just be understood that there is no clear mandate. Voters are fickle, and even voters who like a president or other politicians at the very beginning of their term, they can lose interest very quickly. And so when we think about a political mandate or the duty that certain politicians have to pass what a key figure would want, they are under no such real mandate because it's a political fiction. It's something that candidates tell the public to get things done. Now, another aspect of institutionalism comes to us through Duvernays Law, and it's based on the writings of Maurice Duverger in 1951, and his simple conclusion. In political science, we don't have many laws like the laws of gravity, but this finding is pretty close. He says that the simple majority single ballot system, aka the first past the post system, which we use in the United States, favors the two-party system. Now, there's an entire video that I'd like you to watch in addition to this one. I'm going to post it in the page or discussion board that you're watching now. Go ahead and pause here and watch that YouTube video to get a better understanding of what Duverger's law is all about. Here he is. Here's the video. Enjoy. Thing number 6, parties rule. When we think about democracy, in any democracy around the world, political parties exist. And you may grow fed up, you may grow tired of political parties that you disagree with, or even the ones you agree with you may have some issues with. Nonetheless, parties are a key driving force in the political process. Whenever you have democracy, you typically also have political parties. And who's guiding the will of the parties, typically it's people who are active, people with strong, intense ideological positions, and this can lead to polarization. Polarization is the idea of, think of the North Pole, the South Pole. There are two extreme opposite ends, the poles around the globe. And when we think about polling amongst Democrats and Republicans as well, there are not too many in the middle ground. People, especially political activists, tend to gravitate further and to bend their will to the will of the party. Take, for example, this article showing how Democrats and Republicans have moved further apart on the issues more than ever before. Just in 20 years' time, we see that Democrats have been more consistently liberal in these years. Republicans have been more consistently conservative than in years prior. Take just 25 years ago or so, 1994, Democrats and Republicans did have some common ground. Today's times, less than ever before. Thing number 7, when we talk about independents, people who do not align necessarily neatly with the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, They may either vote third party, or in the absence of third party candidates, they may act as partisans themselves. Here's a chart from Pew Research Center showing that independents outnumber Republicans and Democrats, but few act as true independents. We see that among independent voters, 33%, or in 1994, 38% by 2018. This is the largest group of voters, and yet many act as Democratic voters or Republican voters. There's only very few. Now, when we say very few, we're talking about a few single-digit percentage numbers, but this translates roughly into millions of people. But most people actually align with the Democratic or Republican Party. They will vote consistently with those parties, whether they're independent or not. And so that's something to be aware of as well. Thing number 8, when we hear candidates on the campaign trail, they may be upset or critical of special interest groups like the American Medical Association, environmental groups, the NRA, pro-choice lobbies, and more. There are many, many more special interest groups around the country. And one thing to note, that they do not necessarily act as some boogeyman. These are more of a political fiction. Because take any political outcome in which a decision needs to be made, in which you need to allocate resources such as tax credits, budgetary items, things of that nature. It's hard to think of any political outcome that does not satisfy some specific interests over others. This is kind of the guiding principle behind Madison's Federalist Paper number 10. If you've taken American government, you may have read Madison's work, and he argued that small cultural and religious factions would accrue too much governmental power. Madison argued that because the United States was a large and geographically diverse republic, no one faction could seize too much power because they would have to compete for power with all the other factions. These factions would therefore cancel each other out. And we can see this somewhat evident in our system today. There are many interest groups with access to key candidates, key officials, many interest groups with a large supply of money and information for their candidates, and yet any interest group may win or lose depending on a specific political outcome. But there is no one singular special interest that is dominating all public life. Thing number 9 is that political organization is decentralized. And leaders organize, but they will not gain ground without popular support. When we think about political parties, even when they're in power, take for example the Republicans or the Democrats. When they're in power, they are still subject to political pressure. And who is guiding and dictating all of this political pressure? Does it come from any key figures? Well, the president is the clearest example, but outside of the president, take, for example, the Democratic Party. Who is the leader of the Democratic Party today? Is it Nancy Pelosi? Or is it Bernie Sanders? Hillary Clinton? Barack Obama could even be considered a leader in that political organization, and it's still unclear to this day. Ultimately, it's up to the popular support of voters who they want to throw their support behind. And when the voters make their voice heard, we can see that the parties typically bend their will to those voters. Finally, when it comes to item number 10, thing number 10, this is my favorite of Noel's works, his accumulation. Number 10, political scientists don't know it all. And when you get into political science, it's easy to think that, oh, I know more than the average voter. Yes, you do. Okay? You do know more than the average voter, even by virtue of taking these classes. But one thing to note is that political science is still developing, that the research can come to many errors and conclusions all by itself. And so Noel is going to make the argument that the goal of political science is to make sure that the things we think are true really are. And so I have to bring up things that are called Z variables, or you may also can see it as correlation does not necessarily imply causation. Correlation does not equal causation, because causation is the most important thing that political scientists are seeking out. They're trying to figure out why things happen. What events or what actions uh, are introduced that will lead to the next set of actions. If they can prove causation, they can predict without a shadow of a doubt just what is happening around the world. Now, when we talk about correlation, there are many things that may have been correlated in nature. Take, for example, this chart. It shows that correlation is not causation. You may see a pattern that over time, as ice cream sales increase, you may also see a rise in shark attacks. Now, you may say, wow, well, that's funny. That may say I might not want to eat ice cream because then that will open me up to a greater risk of shark attack. But there's nothing here that would suggest either is the cause of this increase. But when we can look at another variable, think of a third variable. That's what we mean by z variable. It's any variable that can be introduced that might offer a better explanation. Both ice cream sales and shark attacks increase when the weather is hot and sunny. But they are not caused by each other. They are caused by good weather, with lots of people at the beach both eating ice cream and having a swim in the sea. Even though two things seem like they are related, they may be related, but neither is causing the other. And we can see this in other areas as well. You can correlate worldwide non-commercial space launches with sociology degrees, doctorates that are awarded. And we can see a trend that can emerge. This is something we'd call probably a spurious relationship, in which there seems to be some relationship. However, if you just use common sense, you might see this and say, there's nothing going on here. Chances are you'd be right. Here's another. Number of people who drowned by falling into a pool correlates with films Nicolas Cage has appeared. Now, for whatever reason, whenever Nicolas Cage makes 4 films, we see a rise in the number of people drowning in their swimming pools. We can see this in 2007. And in the year where Nicolas Cage made just 1 film, we saw a low level of people drowning by falling into a pool. Is there anything driving this? Some people could say that, yeah, there's a cause here. But if you use common sense, you would argue there's nothing really going on here. Nothing is causing either of the two things to happen. It's just a coincidence. And there are some coincidences in politics. So here are some examples of things that we would think we know. We can maybe assume or theorize, but science, again, is to prove, the goal of science is to prove the things that we know are actually true. So take, for example, you may have heard this claim that money buys votes. But another alternative explanation could be maybe donors just donate to candidates who seem likely to win. Yeah, winning candidates typically do receive a lot of donations, but do candidates win because of the money, or do candidates win because voters have energy and enthusiasm around that candidate? Number 2, parties influence the votes of legislators, or maybe politicians sort themselves into parties they agree with. People often think that legislators have no minds of their own, that they just are simply robotic in nature, that they only take command from the parties, but that has proven to not be true as well. And so politicians, when they do agree with their parties, they may have done the math in their own minds to see which party better meets my chosen preferences. Finally, you may have heard this idea that the media is biased. Well, maybe they're just telling us what we want to hear, and there are many outlets that we can say do maybe prefer certain political parties or candidates, but nonetheless, why are they doing it? Is it to move a political agenda, or is it just a way to gather attention and eyeballs on the screen? So here's a clip. Here's a picture from a video I'll show in a few weeks. But yeah, we can see that eyeballs are the major drive in a lot of these media organizations. You get more attention, you can sell more advertisements. So that's it for Hans Noel's article. I'm going to ask you to go ahead and write out your top 3 things, the things that you found the most interesting from this article. When you do that, go ahead and just say to any others, go ahead and leave a reply to others just saying which thing of theirs that they suggested that you liked as well. All right, thanks for watching. If you have any questions, a Zoom conference will be held shortly to go over this article. Have a good day.